Welcome again to another podcast with Mary Beaver and the continuation of these primordial creator gods. We're going to continue this conversation with part 2 before the Anunnaki. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. If you would like to join us, it's live at 12 o'clock West Coast time and 3 o'clock East Coast time. Hope to see you at Adana of Soul on Telegram. Also in the middle of it, I do have to read page 8 for the first time. There was some confusion where there was frequencies going around and it didn't allow Mary to speak about it. So I'm going to read that one page in the middle of this.
Afternoon, everybody, or evening in some other parts of the world. So I did a part 2 because on the Anunnaki and the Tiamat series, because when I first did the Tiamat, I did not realize that the Anunnaki were actually tied into Tiamat. So that was kind of fascinating to me. And the only reason that I found it fascinating was because I was able to find Enlil in my lineage. When I found that Enlil was 5th generation from Apsu and Tiamat, I became interested in researching it further. So I did a second part, and I'm going to do another series because it literally keeps unfolding, like all this stuff. Part 2 of the Anunnaki, I want to ask everybody to stay open-minded. This one is going to be kind of a brain twister, especially for people who have had out-of-body experiences or have fought on Nibiru and stuff like that. I'm not debunking that at all. So I do have a reason for the way that I wrote this, because it actually ties into an actual older race than the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki actually did not come in to the picture until about, I think it was 4000 BC. But I had also heard from my deep space travels that the Anunnaki had been around for 2 million years. But see, as I go in and try to unlock the things people yeah, there was a few seconds there that wasn't funny. So I did part of an intro, but I was rubber banding. I'm going to try to do it on my laptop today. If not, I'll switch to my phone. As I was saying, again, just stay open-minded. There's a point to what I'm doing because of the location of Tiamat and where it really is. It's not something that is going to be, and I might do a 2-part video on this because today is my birthday and I really only want to dedicate like an hour to this, so and then we can do the rest next week.
Oh my gosh, happy birthday. I know, I'm in New York time. I sent it to you like at midnight.
Thanks. I know, it was funny. I was like, oh, it's not yet, but yeah, you're on New York time. No, that was cool. Thank you. Okay, so chapter 1, the deep layer of 1. What was before the Anunnaki? And again, this is actually based off of my unbroken lineage to Enlil, who I knew was Anunnaki. This is what sparked this whole thing, is I have a timeline that's real, and this is why they don't want us to go back to past 15 generations, because then we can see the truth of the misconception and what they've altered. So I went on a deep dive with that to try to find out what's going on in this. And if you guys want, I did put the bloodline, my ancestral bloodline, in the chat, so you guys can look at it and see the different generations and kingdoms. It's actually quite fascinating. Without further ado, before the Anunnaki, what was before the Anunnaki? This is exactly the kind of question where it's helpful to distinguish mythology, archaeology, and speculative reconstruction. Instead of treating them as the same thing, every civilization has left behind stories that attempt to explain where humanity came from, why the world exists as it does, and who the first beings were. Some of those stories are clearly symbolic. Others preserve historical memories, wrapped in a poetic language, and still others have inspired generations of speculation that extend far beyond the surviving evidence. The challenge for any serious student of ancient history is learning where those 3 worlds intersect. My first workbook already began making this important distinction by presenting my unbroken family tree of the Mesopotamian gods, while acknowledging the later traditions, religious interpretation, and modern theories often expanded upon the original stories. If we are willing to open the historical door, however, they may be an even older story hidden beneath the Mesopotamian myths themselves, a story that begins long before the Anunnaki ever appear. One of the discoveries that surprised archaeologists during the last century was the Anunnaki are not the first beings described in the Mesopotamian tradition. Although modern books and documentaries often begin with the Anunnaki as though they suddenly arrived upon the cosmic stage, the oldest cuneiform tablet tell a much longer story. By the time the Anunnaki appear, several generations of primordial beings have already come and gone. They are heirs to an already ancient creation narrative rather than its beginning. The earliest cosmological genealogy unfolds in approximately the following order. Primordial state, which is no heaven and no earth. Then comes Apsu, primordial fresh water, who marries Tiamat, primordial salt sea, giving birth to Lamu and Lahamu, who also give birth to Anzar and Kissar, and then they create Anu. I actually also found out the name of Anu's wife that gave birth to Enki and Enlil, but I'll have that story in the third one, because she actually ties in a lot of the mystery of the Anunnaki. Anu giving birth to Enlil and Enki, and the later divine generations called the Anunnaki councils. This progression reveals something that is easily overlooked when reading only the later myths. Before there were councils of gods, kings of heaven, divine judges, temple builders, or champions of cosmic order, there was only an undivided primordial existence. There was no heaven suspended above the earth, no mountains, no rivers, no stars, no cities, and no humanity. The oldest text begins not with rulers or civilizations, but with two great primordial realities that the Mesopotamians understood as the very foundation of existence itself. The first beings introduced into the story are Apsu and Tiamat. Together they represent the mingling of two eternal waters, the silent, life-giving fresh water beneath the earth, and the vast, restless salt waters that stretched beyond the known world. Their union does not merely create a family, it initiates creation itself. From their mingling emerge Lamu and Lahamu, followed by Ansar and Kissar, then Anu, and eventually Enlil, Enki, and the later generations who will one day become known collectively as the Anunnaki. This ancient progression is significant because it reminds us that the earliest Mesopotamian worldview did not begin with celestial kings or divine governments, it began with the waters. That observation may seem deceptively simple, yet it carries enormous implications for understanding the worldview of the ancient Near East. The first beings are not kings, they are not warriors, they are not builders, they are not conquerors, they are water. To the modern reader, this language often sounds symbolic or poetic, but to the people of ancient Mesopotamia, it reflected the most fundamental truth they knew about existence. Their civilization depended entirely upon water. The Tigris and the Euphrates rivers transformed otherwise inhospitable plains into fertile farmlands capable of sustained cities, kingdoms, temples, and writing itself. Without water, there would have been no agriculture, no settlements, no civilizations, and ultimately no history to record. Viewed through that lens, Apsu and Tiamat became more than mythological characters, they became personifications of the two life-giving forces that shaped the Mesopotamian world. Apsu embodied the hidden freshwater rising from spring, rivers, and underground aquifers, the quiet, sustained source of life beneath the earth. Tiamat embodied the immeasurable salt water of the Great Sea, powerful, unpredictable, fertile, and limitless. Together, they symbolize the primordial environment from which all ordered existence emerged. The generations that follow can therefore be understood as successive stages in the ordering of the cosmos. Lamu and Lahamu represent the first emergence of distinguishable substance from undifferential waters. Anzar and Kizar established the great division of heaven and earth. Anu embodies the celestial realm, while Enlil and Enki introduce the principles of governance, wisdom, atmosphere, and civilization itself. Only after these foundations have been established does the story finally arrive at the Anunnaki, the divine assembly responsible for administering the already created universe. Perspective encourages us to ask a deeper historical question. If the earliest Mesopotamian myths preserve memories of a world that began with endless waters, are they simply poetic inventions, or could they also contain echoes of humanity's distant past? Throughout this workbook, we will examine mythology alongside archaeology and comparative history, allowing each discipline to illuminate the others while carefully distinguishing documented evidence from informed speculation, rather than assuming that every ancient narrative must be either literal history or complete fiction. We will explore the possibilities that these remarkable traditions preserve fragments of humanity's earliest attempts to remember a world that existed long before recorded history began. In doing so, we step beyond the familiar stories of the Anunnaki and enter a far older landscape, one where creation begins not with empires or celestial councils, but with two primordial waters whose meeting gave birth to everything that followed. So we're going to dive into chapter 2, Why Water? To the modern reader, beginning the story of creation with water may seem poetic or symbolic. We are accustomed to thinking in terms of planets, galaxies, atoms, and the laws of physics. Ancient civilizations, however, understood the world through direct observation of nature, and nowhere was the more evident than in Mesopotamia. To a Sumerian living nearly 5,000 years ago, water was not merely one element among many, it was the foundation upon which all existence depended. Every harvest, every city, every kingdom, every temple, and every generation of humanity owed its life to the movement of water across the landscape. Mesopotamia itself is a product of water. Long before cities such as Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, and Ur rose from the floodplains, winter snows accumulated high within the mountains of what is now eastern Turkey and Armenia. Each spring, those snows melted beneath the warming sun, sending torrents of fresh water southward into the great arteries that would become known as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Year after year, these rivers overflowed their banks, depositing rich layers of fertile silt across an otherwise harsh landscape. Over countless generations, those floodplains became some of the richest agricultural lands on Earth, allowing permanent settlements to grow into villages, villages into cities, and cities into one of humanity's first great civilizations. The process can be visualized in its simplest form. Winter snows accumulate in the mountains of Armenia, then snow and glaciers melt each spring. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers swell. Seasonal floods spread fertile silt. Floodplains are formed. Agriculture flourishes. Permanent settlements appear. Civilization is born. Without this annual cycle, Mesopotamia could never have existed as history remembers it. Remove the rivers and the cities disappear. Remove the floodplains and there is no agriculture. Remove agriculture and there are no temples, no kings, no writings, no trade, ultimately, no civilization. To the ancient inhabitants of the region, this truth was not philosophy. It was everyday experience. Water was life itself. It should therefore come as a little surprise that the earliest Mesopotamian creation stories began not with mountains or stars, but with two eternal waters. Apsu represents the hidden freshwater abyss lying beneath the earth. the quiet reservoirs that fed springs, rivers, and wells. His waters were calm, clear, and life-giving, forever rising silently from beneath beneath the soil. Every drink drawn from a well and every irrigation canal that nourished the fields reminded the Sumerians of this unseen source beneath their feet. Standing opposite Apsu is Tiamat, the vast primordial salt sea. Unlike the quiet stillness of fresh water, Tiamat embodied movement, mystery, and limitless creative potential. She is the immense body of water stretching beyond the known world, the ever-changing sea whose tides and storms inspired both reverence and fear. To later Babylonian poets, she became the great mother of creation itself, the boundless ocean from which every possibility first emerged. The ancient text tells us that creation begins when these two primordial waters merge or mingle. Their union gives rise to the first generations of divine beings, who gradually shape the ordered cosmos from what was once undifferential potential. This image should not necessarily be read as a scientific explanation of Earth's origins, rather it is a cosmological explanation, a sacred model that describes how order emerges from chaos, how distinction arises from unity, and how life itself brings from the meeting of complementary forces. Modern readers sometimes ask whether Apsu and Tiamat were intended to represent literal individuals, extraterrestrial visitors, or ancient rulers whose stories became exaggerated over time. The surviving Mesopotamian text offers little support for those interpretations. In their oldest form, Apsu and Tiamat are not kings, queens, or travelers from other worlds. They are the primordial conditions of existence. It's personified so that the mystery of creation could be understood through story rather than abstract philosophy. Yet, myth often preserves multiple layers of meaning. Beneath their poetic language may lie observations about the natural world remembered over countless generations. The people who first told these stories watched rivers emerge from unseen springs, witnessed fertile land appear after seasonal floods, and saw life flourish wherever fresh water met the sea. It is entirely possible that these experiences shaped the symbolism of Apsu and Tiamat, embedding practical environmental knowledge with a sacred narrative that could be passed faithfully from one generation to the next. As we continue this journey into the earliest layers of Mesopotamian tradition, it becomes increasingly clear that the first beings are not rulers, warriors, or temple priests. They are the living water from which every later generation flows. Before there were gods, who governed heaven? Before there were kings, who ruled cities? And before humanity learned to write its own history, there were only the silent depths of Apsu and the boundless sea of Tiamat. Two primordial waters whose eternal meeting became the first chapter in one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. You can go over the photo that I put up. So it says, this photo is part 2, before the Anunnaki, the primordial story of creation and divine. So it has the two pictures of the beings. And again, why water? To use this sounds poetic. To a Sumerian living around 3000 BC, it was simply reality. Everything came from water. And it shows a timeline going downward where it was just water and nothing else existed, showing possibly how a reset could have occurred. And these guys were the survivors of it, building a civilization. I hope these pictures do help you guys. First creation occurs when these waters meet. That is cosmological explanation rather than a historical accounting. So chapter 3, could there be a historical memory underneath? Having explored the earliest generations of the Mesopotamian creation story, we now arrive at one of the most fascinating questions in the entire study of ancient civilization. If myths are not simply fictional stories, but cultural memories preserved through symbolism, what real events might have inspired them? This question moves us beyond traditional mythology and into the fields of archaeology, geology, and comparative history. While definitive answers remain elusive, modern science has uncovered remarkable evidence suggesting that humanity witnessed dramatic environmental changes long before the first words were ever written into clay tablets. This chapter enters the realm of informed speculation. Rather than asking whether every ancient story should be accepted as literal history, we instead ask whether the oldest myths may preserve fragments of genuine human experiences that survived through thousands of years of oral tradition. Ancient storytellers did not possess scientific language to describe geological events, climate change, or rising oceans. Instead, they preserved extraordinary events through narratives filled with gods, cosmic battles, sacred floods, and the ordering of the world from primordial waters. Beneath these symbolic stories may lie echoes of events witnessed by real people whose descendants carried those memories forward across countless generations. To understand this possibility, we must travel back to the close of the last ice age, between approximately 12,000 and 10,000 years ago. The Earth underwent one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in human history. Massive continental glaciers that had covered much of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia began melting as global temperatures rose. Over the course of several millennia, enough frozen water returned to the oceans to rise global sea levels by roughly 120 meters, nearly 400 feet. Coastlines that had existed for thousands of years disappeared beneath advanced seas. Entire rivers, valleys were transformed. Islands were separated from mainlands. New coastlines emerged while ancient ones vanished forever beneath the waves. The sequence of these changes can be visualized also as followed. The last ice age, global temperature rises, continental glacier melts, sea levels rise approximately 120 meters, ancient coastline floods, river systems change course, human populations migrate inland. Oral traditions preserve the memory. Unlike the myths themselves, these environmental changes are well established through modern geology, paleoclimatology, and archaeology. Marine sediment cores, fossil shorelines, submerged forests, coral reef studies, and radiometric dating all confirm that sea levels rose dramatically as the great ice sheets retreated. What remains uncertain is not whether these events occurred, but how the people who experienced them understood what they were witnessing. Imagine living in a community whose ancestors had occupied the same coastlines for generations and family shorelines slowly retreat beneath the sea. Productive hunting grounds disappear, rivers that once flowed through fertile valleys change direction or overflow their banks. Villages are abandoned as the waters continue advancing years after years.
Indigenous traditions from every inhabitant continent preserve accounts of rising waters, drowned lands, and ancestral migration. Although each culture tells the story differently, the reoccurring pattern is striking. Water is remembered not merely as a force of destruction, but as the medium through which one age gives way to another. The old world disappears beneath the waters, and the new world emerges in its place. This raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps Apsu and Tiamat were never intended to describe literally individuals in the modern sense, but rather personifications of the immense natural forces that ancient people experienced firsthand. Their union may symbolize the meeting of fresh rivers and expanding seas that reshaped landscape after the Ice Age. Their descendants would then represent the gradual emergence of order from environmental chaos as humanity adapts to a transformed world, founded permanent settlements, and eventually gave birth of civilizations itself. Of course, this reconstruction remains speculative. The surviving cuneiform tablets do not explicitly state that Apsu and Tiamat represent post-Ice Age flooding, nor do they describe geological processes in scientific terms. We must therefore resist the temptation to claim certainty where the evidence remains incomplete. At the same time, archaeology repeatedly reminds us that myths often preserve genuine cultural memories beneath layers of symbolism. The farther we look into humanity's distant past, the more likely it becomes that history, memory, and mythology overlap in ways that are only now beginning to be understood. If this interpretation holds even a measure of truth, then the Mesopotamian creation story becomes more than a tale about gods. It becomes humanity's attempt to remember a world that no longer exists. A distant age when coastlines vanished, rivers were reborn, and entire generations watched the landscape of their ancestors disappear beneath rising seas. What later civilizations remembered as the age of primordial waters may have begun with real people standing upon real shores, witnessing one of the greatest environmental transformations our planets have ever known.
Continue, our investigation into the generations before the Anunnaki, we will keep asking the same guiding questions. Where does mythology end, and where might memory begin? Somewhere between those two worlds may lie the oldest surviving story humanity has ever told. So before we go on with that, chapter 3, I do want to kind of go into my thoughts with that and today's kind of fear pattern. So when I was thinking about it, and again, my Asperger's gives me a 20 to 40 different perspectives. So I have to like run stuff through my head a lot, and then I have to look things up. So with that thought, and the reason that I brought it to that was because, again, my ancestry ended at Enlil and Lilith becoming, husband and wife after she divorced Adam. But where did they come from? Now, the speculation could be, yes, they came from space. Or did they? You know what I mean? So then when we started doing Tiamat, I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, he's connected to that. But that means Enlil never left the planet. And they didn't come from somewhere. Because if Tiamat was born of the earth, and that's her 5th generational grandson, then that kind of debunks the whole space story. Or does it? We don't know. So that's why I wanted to do an investigative thing, because we know the resets make us turn into primitive beings, right? Right now we're talking about, oh, we're in the middle of a reset. They're taking people out. They're going to flood LA. They're going to flood this. Did you get the Masonic maps of the world flood? I've seen them. My grandfather was in there and he told us about it. Where I live, we're supposed to have beachfront property because the floods were coming in, but that was supposed to be years ago and it never happened. There was more to what I was seeing in my ancestral bloodline than what I could understand. And then when I was doing, I actually have a bloodline that talks about a reset where they hid one of the princes in the church. So I saw how those bloodlines, if it's an unbroken bloodline, then it has historical accuracy. Now, going back to my grandfather's last name, Jones, it cuts off. I can't find anything. So was he his ancestors put into the bloodline of Jones as part of a reset? And if that's the case, how did he survive? Who was his family before the reset, if anybody's following? So that being said, let's go on to chapter 4. Imagine this from their perspective. History is often written by those who leave behind momentums, encryptions, and written records. Yet, for more than 95% of humanity's existence, there were no books, no clay tablets, and no written languages to preserve the experience of one generation for the next. Instead, history lived with memory. It was spoken around campfires, repeated by village elders, sung through ceremonies, and entrusted to children who would one day become the next generation of storytellers. Long before writing existed, oral tradition was humanity's living library. Now imagine standing in the place of those ancient ancestors. You have no understanding of plate tectonics, glacial cycles, or climate science. You do not know that the Earth is emerging from an ice age, or the global sea levels are slowly rising as enormous continental glaciers melt thousands of miles away. You simply witness the world around you changing within the span of a few generations. Places my grandparents described no longer exist. The shoreline continues moving inland. Familiar landmarks disappear beneath the advancing waters. Rivers that once flowed through fertile valleys carve new channels across landscapes. What my ancestors knew as permanent suddenly becomes temporary. Imagine your grandfather telling you, "There used to be land where there is now sea." As a child, you may struggle to believe him, yet he spoke with complete certainty because he had heard the same accounts from his own grandfather before him, generation after generation. The story remained unchanged. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beneath the waters now covering the coast, there had once been forests, hunting grounds, villages, and places held sacred by the people. To those who never saw the lost world, such accounts would have sounded almost unimaginable, yet they carried the authority of ancestral memory. Perhaps another elder called a different landscape entirely. The river once flowed differently, in quotes. She might say, while pointing toward a valley now abandoned by the current. Children listening to these stories would have grown up knowing that the world had not always looked as it did today. They would have understood that rivers could move, lakes could disappear, coastlines could vanish, and entire communities could be forced to begin again somewhere new, without maps, geology, or written records. The only way to preserve those extraordinary events was to remember them and tell them faithfully. And again, this comes to another example where I live. It's close to, and if you guys want to look this up online, it's called the Forest Hill Bridge. It is one of the highest bridges in the United States because, or maybe even in the world, I'm not sure, but I know it is in the United States. So it's in Forest Hill, California. Look up the Forest Hill Bridge. They were going to build a dam there. Okay, so there were a lot of houses that lived on these mountain ridges and next to the water. And the county, before I was even born, the county came in and bought everybody out to build this dam. Well, it got changed. The land got taken from these people, and I'd heard about the last people who fought the county for their land because they were supposed to have beachfront property and from this dam, and they never did. So I have memories of, younger, knowing some of those people who were at the tail end of this fight. Now in the Folsom Dam, however, we have divers that go down there. There are houses, there are buildings under this water, and it is so deep that the catfish are actually almost as big as boats. So, I'm not going to say it's a interesting dumping ground. However, the history is there. So that's what made me think about the rising waters and the regeneration of things. So moving on. Over centuries, memory rarely remains unchanged. Every generation interprets inherited stories through the experience of its own time. Practical observations gradually acquire symbolic meaning. A flood becomes more than a flood. It becomes the dividing line between one age and the next. A disappearing coastline becomes the boundary between the world of the ancestors and the world of the living. Rivers cease to be only waterways and become sacred lifeline flowing from the very foundations of creation itself. The language of memory slowly transforms into the language of myth. This process is not unique to Mesopotamia. Anthropologists have documented how oral traditions across the world preserve astonishingly ancient information by embedding historical events within memorable narratives. Many indigenous Australian traditions appear to preserve descriptions of coastlines that existed thousands of years before recorded history. Native American nations remembered migrations following changed landscapes and retreating glaciers. Island cultures throughout the Pacific preserve stories of islands lost beneath rising seas. Although these accounts are expressed through sacred stories rather than scientific language, they often contain recognizable memories of genuine environmental events experienced by distant ancestors. The Mesopotamian creation story may have developed through a similar process. Imagine a people who remembered that everything familiar had once emerged from one overwhelming world of water. As generations passed, those memories would naturally become larger than history itself. The waters would no longer represent only rivers and seas, but the very beginning of existence. The forces that shaped the landscape would become living beings with names, personalities, and relationships. Apsu would become the eternal freshwater deep, Tiamat the timeless primordial sea, and their union would symbolize the mysterious movement or moment when order first emerged from chaos. Hence the reason the secret societies refer to order out of chaos, chaos out of order. This possibility does not diminish the beauty of the mythology. Rather, it enriches it. The creation story becomes more than an imaginative tale about distant gods. It becomes humanity's attempt to preserve the memory of extraordinary experiences using the only language available before writing, the language of symbols, sacred stories, and ancestral tradition. In that sense, mythology serves as a bridge between history and memory, carrying fragments of the distant past across thousands of years until they eventually reached the scribes who inscribed them into clay. Of course, no surviving text can prove exactly how these traditions originated. The earliest writing tablets already present stories that were ancient when they were first recorded. What we possess today is therefore not the beginning of the story, but the oldest surviving copy of a tradition that had likely been passed from one generation to another for countless centuries. Between the events themselves and the written record lies a vast span of unwritten history that can only be explored through archaeology, comparative mythology, and careful reconstruction. Perhaps this is why the oldest creation stories feel so familiar across civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia. They are not merely stories about gods, they are stories about remembering. They preserve the universal human experience of watching the world change, struggling to understand those changes, and ensuring that future generations would never forget where they came from. Somewhere within those memories may rest echoes of humanity's earliest encounters with a transforming earth, a world where disappearing coastlines, shifting rivers, and rising seas became the foundation upon which some civilizations' oldest myths were built. So since we're close to an hour, we got like 10 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and end it there, and we'll start chapter 6 next Saturday. But if anybody has any questions for what I've already gone over, please ask away.
Mary, is this from the Enuma Elish?
The what?
The Enuma Elish creation story by the Anunnaki?
No.
Oh, no, I was curious. The excerpt you're reading from, is it the Book of Enki or the clay tablets they found in ancient Babylon? I was curious.
Oh, no. Well, I don't know when you jumped in, but I did talk in the beginning that when I was reading on Tiamat, and I realized that she's the 5th generation from Enlil, who happens to be in my bloodline, and I posted it, I think. Did it come in? Yeah. So the relationship to Lilith and the chief god Enlil. So this is an actual bloodline accounting, because when I did my master exit, after you guys do one of these, it unlocks your family's lineage. You get to go back generations. And the furthest I've gotten back was 8,000 years with the Druid.
Okay.
So when I saw this, but I didn't know about Tiamat. I mean, I knew about her, but I didn't have a pull before to look into her, right? Because I usually follow what the heavens want me to. And there was somebody that listens to my stuff sent me an email asking about Tiamat, and they're very knowledgeable in just like you and other people are, due to your own experiences and past life knowledge. He asked if I could, talk about it. So I went into the forbidden knowledge, and this is what I do. Is I'm like, I'm going to see if this is in the forbidden knowledge, right? Because we know that the secret societies know the truth. Okay, whether they mess with it or not, they
Yeah,
have
the
access
Masons are the
to this
truth.
book.
Yeah.
So when I did that, I think you and I have talked about it before. I was given
Probably.
the sigil of creation. So
Right.
it's a cosmic mathematical sigil. It's where life creates, I guess.
Uh-huh.
So the heavens had gifted it to me through various channels,
Right.
and they showed me how to use it because I was afraid of it at first. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might blow up the whole world, right?
Right.
Because I didn't know. And after I learned how to use it, basically what it does is it sets the record straight in the 5D. Now, I'm
Okay.
not saying what happened in the 3D is wrong. It's
Right.
actually not. It just depends on the timeline you're on. Because your
Exactly.
timeline may not match my timeline, yet we were running the
I'm
same
not. I know
parallel
I'm not from
timeline.
this timeline, dude.
Huh?
110%. I'm not from this era, this timeline that you guys are in.
Right.
I came in elsewhere. I've got proof of that too, which is wild. Oh.
So what the sigil did was it opened up doors when I asked it to take the information that I got from the forbidden knowledge and break it down
Yeah.
using the creation, codes, if you will, because
Right.
they're codes. Everything's code. So what it did was it gave pieces that everything that we know today was missing.
Ah,
Some people
okay. I
can call
see.
their story fact. Some people can call it, but a lot of good, I don't think there's any good, secret society people out there, very selfish.
No.
But I mean, maybe there are.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I
Uh,
live with the ones. So,
that's debatable.
right. So, but a lot of there are good books in the Forbidden Knowledge where people do
For
admit
sure.
where I have these codes that give me the names of these angels, but I can't say for fact that I'm not missing the whole name. So that right
Right.
there is inspiring because they're saying there may be more to this angel, but we haven't found those codes yet. So that gave me hope with this creation sigil that I have is that I have some of the missing codes and
Okay.
that whoever the creators are that are here to get their children or their
Uh-huh.
creations are
Okay.
gifting these things to certain people who are elevating in peace.
That makes
I only
sense.
know of a few people that have the one I have. I don't know if everybody else has this one because I
Hmm.
know who my creator is, but your
Right.
creator may not be my creator.
Well, I know who my creator is too, though.
Right.
Yeah.
So we
Not
don't
the
all have
same.
the same creator.
Different.
There is
Yeah.
a one source God that is over the metaverse, but she actually has a father in the dark
Yeah.
metaverse that is over her. So it goes all over the place, just like our genes.
Right.
No, I'm actually reading this as what is missing from what is already documented. But I
Yeah.
also put in my ancestral because that's what triggered the thought. If the
Right.
Anunnaki were said that they came through spacecraft, but then Tiamat is the fifth generation saying they never left the planet and they were created by the Earth, that leaves a gap in everybody's accountings, right?
Well, 100%.
So,
But also the Anuk, they took the history and swapped it because they destroyed the Ione and created their own iteration of mankind, interrupting
right.
everything, which would be
But
us, or which would be pure human DNA because it's only two strand versus the 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 on strand.
correct. But
Yeah.
with this new finding, if you look at the pictures, like the one that has the Stargate, it'll kind of give you a glimpse of what's going to happen in the next chapters. Chapter 7,
Right.
finding as it is. If we go to chapter 7 and it shows the Stargate, it opens that up to extraordinary, but not necessarily extraterrestrial, or were they stargates? We know about stargates, right? Stargates go to certain planets. So
Yep.
that could be how Jupiter was put into that whole thing. But how did they know that back then, right? I mean, if
Well,
they came from
the
sea and
Anuk,
water,
what I
how would they have?
remember, the accounting of the Anuk was they came from the dark universe. They were the hybrids of fallen angels from the celestial wars that took off into the dark verse, or made it the dark verse because the dark Draco. Beyond that, I remember that because I was there because I followed them, the fallen into the dark verse and watched the wars happen there. And that's what I remember them coming from into our universe with a dying planet that they put the death core of a red star into. and they were told they heralded the coming of the Dark Draco and feigned as refugees to our universe. But again, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm learning new information listening to you about this. It's really interesting.
Right. So, but no, this isn't from any of the books that you guys have seen or known. It's literally from what the creation sigil is filling in the gaps of certain things. I'm not saying that
Okay.
they may have been scooped up somewhere because they were immortal. So
Right. Yeah.
the rest of the book or the workbook that I wrote, it leads into
Yeah.
something. I actually have the coordinates of where
Okay.
Tiamat is.
Interesting.
But I'm not going to talk about that right now because it leads into something else. It's like, so what's happening when we're going into the 5D is we're correcting all the timelines. So everybody that has these multiverse timelines are supposed to be going into the one timeline. So how do you do that without a catastrophic collision?
Right.
So we have to be given the missing source codes in order to merge the timelines instead of, well, like the TV series Loki on Netflix. Has anybody watched that? It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that because I've seen a lot of my experiences of being in Apocalypse, and I didn't watch that. And I know Mary was like, you should see it. And when you said that there was some things underwater, like I have stuff like from China and India going underwater, and I live on Long Island, so I also saw that go underwater. And then there'd be floodings, like flooding in New York City and everything like that. So like that resonates with me in the sense that whatever the timelines are, I know they're correcting because they're correcting me with my, the people I used to go out with, some of my friends, and I've seen them all being corrected. But I was just guided to tell everybody, like, you need to continue to correct all these timelines because that's how the heavens told me to do it. So like listening to this, knowing that I believe because the water world under there, because it can't be empty. I believe in it because I've seen things in my experience and didn't want to go down to that water area. But obviously they're making movies with the water being alive.
Well, yeah, and that, again, this is what the heavens wanted me to fill in, is everybody talks about the resets, like, oh, we're being reset. And then everybody talks about the trains of the children coming in. But where's the adults, right? So what happened to the civilizations before? This is one of them. This is an older one. Now, Anu's wife, the mother of Enki and Enlil, actually holds the key to the Anunnaki, not Tiamat's bloodline. That's why she's not mentioned in history. And that's what I want to get into, not next week, but in chapter 3. So it's very fascinating. I'm, again, not debunking other people's experiences. We're just literally going through a Loki type phase of timelines, and we're going to merge them together. And that way people know the certain resets and what was there and how they survived it. Because again, we can go on all these other channels and listen to the portals and how the elite survived. They went to different dimensions, or they went into other worlds, or they went underground where they have massive underground cities. But what happened to everybody else on the top? Nobody talked about it. Everybody thinks it's, and I've talked about it before, and I've even said, does everybody look at Down syndrome adults? They look kind of Neanderthalic. If you think about it, if you let them grow their hair out and, wear a bunch of cloth, they resemble the Neolithic time period of the caveman. So, and since we have a rise of spectrum disorder people right now, and we can blame it on the vaccines and stuff like that, but what if the elites know that we were in a reset and they were actually trying to suppress the spectrum children by vaccinating them, by damaging their genes further? I mean, really think about it. You have a Down syndrome adult who is almost animalistic behavior, and we're going through a reset. We're not going to survive. The basic human's not going to survive, but somebody who can actually kill a mountain lion or a lion, these guys are like, we call it retard strength, but, godlike strength. They have to have animalistic behaviors because they're going to be living in a world that they have to survive. And I've talked about the survival gene. And Anunnakis actually were the first ones. Hitler didn't find and come up with it on his own with his scientists. They found these tablets that talked about the surviving gene. The Neanderthals probably weren't bred with monkeys back in the day. They were the surviving gene that could actually survive a catastrophic event of the world changing, where normal humans can't for whatever reason. It could be sickness, it could be illness. They can't outrun a cheetah or whatever the animal was at the time. So that's all that I'm trying to cover is nobody talks about the aftermath of the reset. We all talk about the migration. Oh, in my Native American bloodline, did the natives weren't here first. It was the clans because they came across the ice bridge. But let's not talk about the ice bridge because that offends the Native Americans. Do you see where I'm going with that? The point is the creation sigil, the codes that I was given is piecing together an older thing. We have to learn how it started. Again, I didn't know Enlil was connected to Tiamat until last week. I was like, whoa, that's amazing because I totally have them in my bloodline. And one of the most, powerful ruling people today are in that same bloodline if you take a look at it. So, and then I put in the history that I found listed in these temples and churches where they were recorded. Because we know that they have the halls of knowledge. The halls of knowledge are underground temples that were preserved during the mud floods. Another reset. I will go into one of those, but this one talked about the waters. So I do have family bloodline that do talk about the mud floods. So, but they're literally a couple thousand years off of each other.
Well, kind of to piggyback on what Rusty said a while ago about things being under the water and she's seen them, could that be a reason why we had the ice age? Was that like a reset for the water?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Because what is it called? Avatar, like the cartoon. It talks about the earth, water, sea, and fire, right? All those nations. And they were all split on the one big island. I think that's talking about before the island split. Like that massive, what Earth used to be, the one big island. And then the rest was ocean, or just smaller islands here and there. So what happened during that split? Was it because the new reset coming up is actually fire? And I think that these resets may or may not go in order. I'm just thinking out loud. But if we had an ice age and then we had a water, which was the flood, and what's next? Fire. And the Bible even tells you those who are not in the book of life burn in the lake of fire. So what turns into a lake? The whole planet is going to turn into molten lava. So how are you going to survive that reset? Hence the reason they're trying to get to the moon and Mars. Because nobody will survive that reset. Nobody in another dimension. Nobody in the underground world. The Earth is resetting in her massive capacity. So it has to go back to what's called like a regenerative, as if she's just growing. So there's all these historic guidelines in the halls of knowledge, which are just ancient temples of historical accountings, languages that people can't even transcribe, that are locked in our DNA. If they would open those doors, and I think that's why they're doing these disclosures or allowing us to do them, is they're trying to see what people see from their DNA so they can run back, pull those scrolls, you know what I mean, and be like, oh, there's missing language or there's the missing story. This is what that means. The Vatican does it all the time. So I'd only imagine other temples do the same thing. There's an older temple here in America, actually in Missouri, older than even the Vatican temple. So could you imagine what is in that history? It's older than what the Vatican has.
Interesting place. Interesting location. Is it southern Missouri?
Oh, I don't know. But it's where I sent
Okay.
my final DSAT trust. I did not
Okay.
send it to the Vatican. And
Smart move.
was it like, what, 2 or 3 days later, or the next day, Trump was swearing and cussing on national TV. She shocked the reporters.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then 2
Yeah.
weeks later, here comes, I'm not saying it's a coincidence, but, here comes
The Atlas?
yes, the AI Atlas came.
Yeah, the 3-eye Atlas. Yeah, I was on it for 13 weeks. I remember It's a very interesting craft.
Well, it's
It's a-
multidimensional and it
oh
has a
yeah,
lot of
dude.
different
Yeah,
creators on
100%.
it coming to collect
Yep.
their offspring to
Yep.
reseed the universe, metaverses.
Yeah, I saw the arc that was attached to the back. It's about the same
Yeah.
length of the ship, and it's dark, and it has paws. I was like, "Holy shit!" I saw that. Are we still in a time frame for like what's the time frame for the? Because we all know that the Ring of Fire, that's how it's going to start, and then it's just going to send everything else off. But what's the time frame
Hold
for
on real
that?
quick.
You
I'm going
know?
to see if I can turn my headphone up.
Well, this actually reminds me, and I think I shared with you months and months ago, Mary, the dream that I had where I was coming from Middle Earth. I was trying to, I went down there to Middle Earth to tell these people, like, you need to move. Like, there's, there's some, the lava, I guess it was the lava volcano, something was going on. It was lava. I said, you got to leave, you got to evacuate. And they had said, no, we're good, because they were so used to being like, they're good with us. Like, no, not this time. You need to get out. And everybody was just going about business like usual until they saw the lava coming, and then they start panicking, and nobody banged it out.
Right. Well, the conspiracy theorists did. And those are
Right,
probably the ones that survived.
right.
So,
But
again,
can you
another
imagine if
reset.
hollow Earth gets full though of lava, the heat that's going to be on the surface just from that?
Hmm.
Well, yeah.
Care to add, Jack?
It's just how it works. Well, see, this is the thing because I'm not from this. You gotta remember, I'm not from this timeline. I was watching movies in Korea. Like, there's three movies I watched in Korea. One was The Crazies, one was The Host, the other one was The Burrowers, and they didn't come out until 2006, 2007, 2006, 2011, and 2010. And I watched those in Korea. I remember sitting in the day room watching it with my friends. So that the timeline I'm from, like, that's the World War III timeline. That's where I'm from. And World War III happened. And that's how the world ended and how humanity left the planet. And when I shifted back over and jumped over here because of my relation to projects and how we were just being used and hopping around and stuff, then, and I heard as a kid about the fault line, the San Andreas fault line that goes all the way up, Pacific fault line that goes all the way up to Washington. And it goes through where I'm at right now in Redmond, Oregon. And I saw to stay off, which could have happened because we did have a tsunami here on the coast. My friend Christy Martindale remembers the alarms going off and her getting swished off into the ocean and drowning and dying and then waking up on another timeline. So that's happened. We've had all these timelines. So this is the final one that Mary's talking about as the reset. This is the best thing for the planet and the best thing for everybody. The earth needs to heal. When the earth heals, I mean, it'll crust over. If it's all lava, when it cools, what's going to happen? It's going to go into an ice age. She's going to heal, and then everything's going to be new again.
Right. Because the waters have to come back.
Yep. Everything's covered up, but it's all there. They're just going to pop out, and they're just going to heal because she needed to heal for thousands of years, but it hasn't been allowed because of the time loops, and she's been hijacked for so long.
Yep.
Anywho, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
And
Mary.
technically, we're still in an ice age because if there is ice
Yeah.
in any large body of land or water, it's considered an ice age.
She's not
So it
wrong. The
didn't
glaciers,
technically
the
end.
glaciers, the leftover glaciers. Yeah.
Huh?
The leftover glaciers.
Correct.
Yeah. Greenland being one of them.
Well, and the ice wall,
And the ice, yeah, and the ice wall. Yeah.
because those are really just mountain regions
Yeah.
covered by layers and layers of ice.
That's so interesting to even know. Like, my father and I have like the same ability, and he told me that he saw Oregon just get plummeted into the water and disappear with like California, and he showed me the whole section just getting swallowed. And then I'd laugh because we were like, "Oh, that was like another dream," but we really kind of knew it was going to happen.
No,
So that's
imagine.
great
Well,
confirmation.
it's the entire Ring of Fire that goes from the Southern California all the way in the Pacific up and then curls around. into the Alaska region. If you think of the entire West Coast, all the mountains, the inert volcanoes, when those go off, not to mention Crater Lake, which was a supervolcano, and the supervolcano that is the size of, Rhode Island, sitting underneath the Yellowstone, that's gonna be it.
Yep.
That's ground. That's the end of the earth, dude. When that goes, bye bye.
So yeah, the rest of it gets really good. Again, this is just tying in missing parts of that history that I'm kind of walking into. And it has to be a gradual one because again, I don't want to debunk what people have done and where the planet is, but nobody can actually identify where the planet, not even NASA. The forbidden knowledge isn't in there. Even the deep space program doesn't have it listed. So, but I did find it because the creation codes opened it up for me. So once I got the coordinates, I was able to find where it is. So, but I'm going to build up to that for the third section. But I want to kind of bring in the history that we're missing because it's important. I'm not saying that the Anunnaki didn't come from there. I'm just saying that it's not what we had imagined or were told that it was. But it is kind of all of it. So without giving it away. So with that being said, it's 1:13. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now so I can go enjoy my birthday with my children and Mom later. She's going to a funeral.
Well, Mary, once again, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thanks for your time, Mary.
Information.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jack, too. That's freaking, you got some amazing stuff.
I know, Jack. I think you and Rusty, you guys should do a call and compare notes. It'll be awesome.
Who's that?
I think you and Rusty should do a call one day and compare your guys' notes. You guys both know a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
It'll be fun.
Well, thank you for your time and
you.
have a beautiful rest of your day.
I will, thanks.
Yes, happy birthday.
And once again, please leave your comments below and we will address those questions on our next live feed. Just like and subscribe, and I will see you then.